So we will probably.
Thank you for joining us, Father Joseph. So I think we can start. Father John, please read the prayer.
O heavenly King, the Comforter, the Spirit of truth, who art everywhere present and fillest all things, treasurer of blessings and giver of life, come and abide in us and cleanse us from every impurity and save our souls, O good one. Amen.
So I would like to introduce Father Joseph. Father Joseph is a priest of our diocese. He's a priest in the cathedral in London. And in the same time, as I know, he is responsible for few parishes in the south of England. But to start, I just wanted to ask you, Father Joseph, to tell us about your own way to the faith, to the church, how it happened that you became a priest finally.
Well, Father, we could say that it all started in Ireland.
Yes.
With my dear mother of blessed memory, who was Irish from County Cork, who came, along with, of course, many other Irish people in the 20th century to England. She became a nurse, and she married my father, who was English, a farmer. He was also Christian, he was Anglican, but they were married in the Roman Catholic Church, and of course I was baptized in the Roman Catholic Church. That's just how it is. And thanks to her, you know, I could say that I was brought up in the Christian faith, in the Catholic tradition. Went to Catholic schools. Of course, as a teenager, like many others, I had my little time of walking away from all that. But I came back to it after a couple of years, thanks to another woman whom I met in the university, who was definitely a Christian and an Anglican Christian. But because we became close, and she kind of brought me back to actively practicing the Christian faith. We were married in 1979. We were both students, graduate students at that time.
You're talking about Matushka Sarah, I presume.
Yes, of course. Who else? And that same year, I went to for a couple of weeks to Greece, ostensibly to attend a summer school in biochemistry, which was our subject. But really, in the I suppose in the divine providence, to come face to face with orthodoxy, which made a profound impression on me straight away. I remember attending my first divine liturgy in the cathedral in the middle of Athens, and I suppose a little bit like those ambassadors of Saint Vladimir in the great church in Constantinople. It was amazing. But you know what really impressed me was not just the beauty of the liturgy, the chanting. That was all in Greek anyway. I don't speak Greek. But really, there were just the way the ordinary people, the lay people, were kind of sort of caught up in this divine mystery, and a sort of powerful sense somehow of the divine presence in the liturgy. And so that kind of started me thinking, I started reading subversive books like Metropolitan Callistotis at the Orthodox Church and many others. And little by little, I found myself drawn to orthodoxy. And of course, there is a lot in common with the Roman Catholic Church. I believe we have 1,000 years of shared history for a very undivided church. But there are differences. And I just, with my experience, that every time I understood, well, the Roman Catholic Church believes this, and the Orthodox Church believes slightly different. So, well, actually, I think I believe what the Orthodox believe, but it wasn't straightforward because at that time there were not so many Orthodox churches in the UK. Only occasionally one could get to a liturgy, and we weren't living in London. We were living in Leicester. I didn't know the cathedral in London at that time, although I did meet at Metropolitan Entity very briefly once. At that time, it was 1981 or something. He used to travel around. He traveled a lot and did responding to a lot of invitations to speak in churches. And he came to our town, and I just went along and listened to his talks, and I bought there was a little bookstall at the back, and I bought a book called The Way of a Pilgrim, this famous book. I'm not sure really whether so much for the book itself, but I could see people were kind of queuing up to talk to him, to get him to autograph the book, so I joined the queue. And we spoke just for a couple of minutes. Little did I know then that less than 10 years later, I would be in his cathedral. I would be serving in the altar, and so on. But in between, then we went to the United States in connection with our work, again ostensibly to pursue postdoctoral studies in biochemistry at a good American university. But again, from the point of view of Providence, for me to find an open door into the Orthodox Church, because it didn't seem, I didn't find it here in England at that time. So I was fortunate to find a good parish of the Orthodox Church in America, obviously a parish of the Russian tradition, but which was already using a lot of English in the services. There were Americans who had become Orthodox. So that was the time and the place where it was possible for me to become Orthodox. I acquired an Orthodox godmother, a lady from, still at that time, Leningrad. But she turned out to be a spiritual daughter of Metropolitan Antony. She met him in Russia and corresponded. So 3 years later, and this is between 1983 and 1986, 3 years later, when our time came to come back to England, she said, you must go to London. You must go to the Metropolitan Antony's church. And I said, okay. And so I arrived in London in 1986 and went straight to Ennismore Gardens, and I've basically been there ever since. You want more?
Yes, Father. I wanted to ask, based on this, when you came to London and obviously Johannes Garden Cathedral, when did you start feeling, or what made you start feeling that you actually want to serve, to be part of clergy, to serve in the altar, or was it more of a external suggestion, coming from the Metropolitan Antony himself, or how could you describe that?
I think it was probably a bit of both. I think the first time I served in the altar in the cathedral, I think it was the Saturday of Lazarus, and I went to the church and I saw that Metropolitan Antony was preparing to celebrate the liturgy, but entirely on his own. No one else, no other priest, no altar servers. So kind of very shy, because I had in the parish in America, I'd learned, I served, I knew what to do more or less. Very shy, I kind of put my head around the door of the altar. I said, Vladika, do you need any help? It's very, I'm sure was it cheeky or presumptuous, but he basically said, well, do you know what to do? I said, well, yeah, sort of. He said, okay. It was a special day for him too, because apparently it was the 40th anniversary of his monastic profession. So apparently I didn't make a complete mess of things, so they took me in to serve in the autumn. A couple of years later, it was quite early. That was probably 1988 or something like that. Around the same time, Father John Lee of blessed memory. I don't know if you never met him, did you?
No, not me personally. Maybe you can expand on him as well.
Well, he was one of there were three priests in the cathedral at the time. Father Michael Fortunato, who was mostly directing the choir. Father John Lee, American, whom Metropolitan Antony had ordained, and he was like his main closest assistant, I would say, and Father Alexander Fosteropoulos. And Father John invited me to go and visit him one day and talk. And he was very kind of direct. He could be very direct. And he said, well, what did you ever think about the priesthood? Yeah. And I said, well, yes, in a way. I will be anecdotal because I think you're asking me to be anecdotal. When I was still a boy, like I said, went to the Catholic schools, but they were boarding schools. They were run by Benedictine monks. When I was about 11 in the prep school, so I had so we were very exposed, to priests. So I had a dream, and in my dream I was a priest, and wearing the cassock and so on. I think some people were coming. I was giving like this. I woke up and thought, oh, that's interesting. Maybe I could. But it felt good. Maybe this is for me. Sort of drawn to. But then, the next night, all the very soon, I had another dream, and in this dream, I wasn't alone. I had a woman with her, and I understood that this was my wife, and that I was a married man. And that felt quite good too. So when I worked, I thought, priest, wife, priest. It just didn't compute, in the Roman Catholic tradition. So I kind of just left all that on the side. And after 11 years, yes, after about quite soon, the wife or the future wife appeared on the scene. Yeah. But the combination, the priesthood as well, that was 40 years later.
So it was very prophetic dreaming.
But I didn't become a priest straight away. First of all, I became a subdeacon. Then I think, yes, I did. I remember I used to drive Metropolitan Antony around a bit when he was going to places to talk, and there was time to talk to him. And I remember one time when we were coming back from Cambridge or something, I said, Vladika, do you think could I possibly be any use in the church as a deacon? Because at that time there simply was no deacon in the cathedral. And he said, well, maybe. And not straight away, but after a couple of years or so, 4 years, then he finally kind of took a chance, took a run at it, and ordained me as a deacon. So I had the privilege really to be the deacon, his deacon at the cathedral for the last years of his life. It was 8 years.
And what it was like to serve with Vladika Antony?
Well, yes, it was something, because I think the main his main characteristic in the services were just like total concentration. He would just stand there, at the holy table, most of the time with his eyes shut, leaning on his staff because he needed the support, and just totally absorbed in the prayer and the divine liturgy. So that was good. A good example. I would hope to think I learned something just from being there. And he was quite strict. He wouldn't allow any chattering or messing. Everything was very orderly. Yes.
Could you say that with him being strict during the service and demanding, obviously, as you're saying, attention and concentration, and no chatting or walking around, at the same time that outside the service that he would be quite approachable and quite attentive to any people coming to him?
Well, certainly, yes, he was. There was none of this kind of, I'm a bishop, and your place. He was approachable. He had a real gift actually for dealing with people. He could interact with people, all kinds of different levels of society, culture, education. He was able to establish a personal direct contact with almost anyone. So yes, it was that combination.
You see, Father Michael, maybe you have a question, Father Joseph.
Can't hear you, Father.
Yeah, you're on mute.
Yeah. I'm just wondering, Father, when you joined the cathedral, how did you feel? Because it was Russian church, so you are Englishman, and
Half
how did you
Irish.
feel? Well, I half Irish, yes, but
Father, it's important because I don't know whether you noticed this, but certainly I have, that the relationship between Irish and Russians is different from English and Russians.
maybe,
Do you agree? Have you not?
maybe
Well, historically, definitely.
I don't know.
Historically, definitely. But maybe you mean something specific, Father Joseph.
It's a cultural thing, Father. I think somehow the Irish and the Slavs understand one another. They're both kind of quite how to say, difficult to express it exactly. The sense of humor is somehow compatible. They're quite both open. With the Russians, once you get through to them, of course, with the Russians there is this kind of reserve. Maybe that's more of a Soviet thing, but once you get through that, they're very open, very generous, warm-hearted people. But yeah, and the Irish kind of respond to that very well. I know that I've known lots of like Irish Russian marriages, for example. And they seem to work very well. But the English, and I had this, this why they were not in the big theatre order, because they thought that I was very reserved, very polite, very civilized, but reserved. They couldn't kind of get through to me until that changed a bit, I suppose. But yes, of course, it was I had been exposed to the, although my first experience of Orthodoxy is in the Greek context, and also whenever I got to the liturgy here, and it was at a Greek church in Cambridge. But as I actually became Orthodox in the parish of the Russian tradition, with not people Slavic heritage, where they used some Slavonic and so on. So I've been exposed to that, but at that time in the cathedral, it was predominantly liturgically it was very Russian. It was only one Sunday a month they served in English. But at the same time, the social language was already English, because there were still a few old people from the first immigration, who would speak Russian among themselves. But their children, if they were in the church at all, were more English speaking. Well, and certainly the British people who had become Orthodox. So yeah, it took some adjustment. I had to learn a certain amount of the Church Slavonic language before being ordained.
And then, Father, you became the priest. Priest, maybe it's Metropolitan Antony ordained you, or
no,
someone else.
No, Metropolitan Antony reposed in 2003, and then, both before and definitely after his death, it was kind of rather unsettled time, I would say, in the cathedral, in the diocese. this is all, thank God, history. And now it was precipitated, of course, by the huge demographic changes. So when things began to thaw out in the Soviet Union in 1988, and after the end of the Soviet Union in 1991, people started coming from the former countries of the former Soviet Union. First a trickle, and then a sort of flood. So that had a big impact on particularly the cathedral in London. We in the space of a few years, the numbers of people increased several-fold. And when I was first there, like 100 people at the Sunday liturgy was quite a lot. And then all of a sudden you've got 200, 300, 400, 500. And of course these are all Russian-speaking people. And even though, how to say, the point is, although they were Russian, the culture, there was a big cultural difference between the old Russians, the pre-revolutionary Russians, and the Soviet Russians, which didn't make life easy, not to mention the English. So it was quite a complex situation. Anyway, in the middle of all that, yes, the question, possible ordination of the priesthood, was in the. I knew it would come because it always. There's always a risk of that if you're a deacon, and I took the precaution actually of raising it directly with Metropolitan Antony shortly before he died. I just said, what should I do? If a bishop comes along and says, we think we want to make you ordain your priest, are you okay with it? And he said, just said, yes, accept it. So that settled the question in principle. But it happened in practice some years later. And it was actually Metropolitan Innocenti who ordained me priest in 2007.
Father, I know that you have you're a dean of few parishes in the south of England as well. Can you tell us about these small parishes, the new parishes, St. Silan parish, I think. Yeah.
Okay, so yes, I apart from my service at the cathedral, I have sort of acquired parishes as I've gone along. The first one was actually in the Greater London area in Romford. There's quite a lot of people who live on that side of London. Again, that was a deliberate decision to plant a church there. We knew there were people there, but it was very slow. We would serve there once a month for 4 years or something, and there's only a handful of people. And at a certain, every time I thought, okay, this is it. We're flogging a dead horse. This is not viable. And then suddenly something changed. And people started appearing. People started taking responsibility for the parish, and something developed. The next one was down in the south coast in Southampton, That was in, I'd say, it was probably, oh gosh, 2008, something like that. I was still a very new priest. 2009, there were people in Southampton who petitioned Archbishop Innocenti to send a priest to have established regular services. And he sent me. So this wasn't my initiative. And this was a different. This was basically the core people there were English people. And so we started. Again, very simple. Are you familiar with how it works? You just print a space, a hall. You have to set everything up, and just do this. Just serve the liturgy. And then people started coming. Obviously, Russian people found out about it and started coming. And through the founders of the parish were quite closely linked to the monastery in Essex, St. John the Baptist. So they chose St. Silouan as the dedication of the parish. In fact, they had just among themselves and with a blessing prayed together for 5 years before any priest appeared. Just meet once a week and pray Jesus prayer for an hour or two, as they do in the monastery. But yeah, that's been very good. It's grown up as a very mixed parish. English, Russian, a few others, Georgian, some. A really nice a genuine community, which is important. Obviously, there's a limit to what you can do when you only go once a month. But even so, was good. More recently, I've managed to increase that to twice a month. We started with about 10 people, and then after 10 years, we have 100 people. And now we're really at the stage where we very much want and need like our own church. Because we need that stability. We need the temple, Kram. Which was the next one? Yes, the next one was not so far away, Portsmouth. That's a long established parish. Again, originally by English people, then demographic changes, became majority Russian-speaking parish. Not entirely straight for various reasons. They've been through a lot of priests. It's kind of became known as the graveyard of priests in the diocese. But yeah, I was sent there or signed there because it's neighbouring with Southampton. 3 years ago, I think. 4 years, yes. So yeah, things settled down and became stable people and beginning to grow again. And the fourth one, this is on my doorstep here in North London, a community which has started 3 years ago, and this is a community where mainly it's English speaking people. So each community is different. It's like, I think it's probably like having children. and we don't have children, but as I understand, although they all have the same parents, they are at the same time they are individuals. They're different, and it's really fascinating to watch them grow up. Being able to think more for themselves, to develop their own specific character, and so on. It's fascinating to be part of that.
And Father, you're mentioning that obviously some parishes are English speakers, which is basically the local. Some parishes are obviously put together with people coming from abroad. But with regards to other Orthodox churches, in London and in the surrounding areas, is there a communication between the priests of Greek or Georgian or other Serbian Orthodox churches, and whether you have experience of people from other basically churches attending your services, looking up to them?
There has been a long history of a certain relationship among the different Orthodox churches in London. There are quite a lot. There's probably now, around maybe 40 Orthodox parishes in London. But most of them, of course, are Greek Orthodox, but all the other local Orthodox churches are represented with at least one church. An important factor was the tradition of the pan-Orthodox Vespers. So every year, and this is for 30 years or so, on the Sunday of Orthodoxy, we all gather in one of the churches, celebrate the Vespers of the Sunday of Orthodoxy, and have social interaction afterwards. And so in this way, we got to know one another on friendly terms. But that's about it. It doesn't. The rest of it, we get on with our own things, but it's a strong personal relationship, I would say, among the priests who have been there for a long time. Situation is a bit different now for various reasons. Very unfortunately, it's no longer possible to do that because of the inter-Orthodox problems, and that's a shame. On the more positive side, for some years, I noticed that the younger people in the different jurisdictions interact with one another a lot. The people who are not immigrants, the people who are born here, people who have converted. So on that level, there is more like inter-Orthodox interaction than there ever used to be, which is a good thing. But it is a problem that the relationships are. We try to keep like the personal relationships where they exist in good repair, but it's complicated. It's difficult, really, for for the like the Orthodox Church as a whole to be visible and heard in our society. We lack people who are good, to be a good voice for the Orthodox Church. At the same time, that's where it's needed. Let me tell you that this last year to 18 months has been a really interesting time, because there have always been like a little trickle of converts, English people, British people, some other non-Orthodox people, non-Orthodox, traditionally Orthodox people, who one way or another find their way to the church and even succeed in getting in. But this last year, more than a year now, I have noticed, and not only I, talking to other priests, a big increase in the number of people who are coming and knocking on the door of the Orthodox Church. It's been astounding. I get like several people every month now. And so I had to rethink the way that we go about helping such people, receiving such people. Traditionally, we would just meet them, talk to them, send them away to read the gospel or some other books, come back a month later, have another talk, and repeat this process over a few months, and eventually we could baptize them or chrismate them or whatever. Well, it's impossible to do it like that now. There's too many of them. So I decided to try doing it like this, to make just form a group of people who are on my hands, and say, okay, let's meet once a week on Zoom. We can't meet in person anyway because it's COVID and we're too far away, and we'll have a series of talks about like basic introduction to Orthodox Christianity, and discussions and so. The first group, I think it was last autumn. I think I started in October. About 15 people, and I've just about baptized or received nearly all of them now. Around Christmas, I started with a second group of 12 people, and now I'm halfway through the third group. So far this year, I've baptized or chrismated, I think, about 14 or 15 people, which is 3, 4, 5 times as many as previous years. And what's interesting is the diversity of backgrounds. There was in the past what you might call atypical convert to Orthodoxy. The archetype, okay, they would be probably female, they would have higher education, they would be from a fairly clearly defined socio-cultural economic spectrum. They would already be Christians, mostly Anglicans, few Roman Catholics, and they were able to, to get over the cultural and linguistic obstacles and so on. They were drawn, they liked the Russian Orthodox music, the iconography, the preaching of Metropolitan Antony, that sort of thing. But now it's completely different. The people that I'm seeing now, they are much younger. Those typical converts would have been definitely middle-aged, not upper middle-aged. They are young people, mostly under 30. They are predominantly men. There's about 2/3 men to 1/3 ladies, maybe even less than that. Most of them have no Christian background. Most of them we have to receive by baptism. They're coming from Islam, Hinduism, atheism, whateverism, but not Christianity.
Do you think there is an explanation for this? Why such a difference? You know, as you're saying, compared to previous years, you know, that archetype and what you're seeing nowadays. Why?
It's a very, Father, that is a very interesting question. I think probably there is a COVID effect. People have had, generally speaking, had more time to think about important questions of life, maybe to realize that a little bit of the vanity of the consumer society. I think another factor, I think the internet is a significant factor because it means that the simply information about the Orthodox faith is much more widely available than it used to be. There's so much on YouTube and some of it good, some of it a bit not so. But there is a lot of material out there. So, you know, if you just go Google, you know, Orthodox Church or Orthodox Church in Britain or in Ireland or whatever, you will actually get a lot of information, a lot of leads. So that's probably been. We always used to joke that Orthodoxy was, you know, the world's best kept secret, at least in the West. But that is changing quickly.
Well, that's very interesting, actually, as you mentioned. That's a very, very interesting observation. Father Michael, do you want to add anything or ask, or maybe some of our viewers can also add to the questions?
Father Joseph, you mentioned your Zoom meetings, and I know that you studied Scripture, the Holy Scripture. So just found, yeah. So it's a separate thing, or it's the same thing?
No, it's a different activity. I have been on and off involved with leading Bible study groups. And it was something Metropolitan Antony asked me to do even before I was ordained. And those have been very, very good. Of course, it's always good to study the Holy Scriptures, necessary. But at the same time, it also gives people, because it's a relatively small group, probably between 6 and 15 most of the time. It gives people a chance to also to meet one another. We used to do it by also having like something to eat us, because it was in the cathedral evening. People would come from work, bring some food. So there was like a social dimension to it as well, which is particularly important when you have a very large parish. Because in the cathedral there's hundreds and hundreds of people, and it can actually be very difficult even to get to know anybody if you're new to that. So I found that the people who were new to the cathedral were very much overrepresented in the Bible study group, simply because they were looking for chance to have some interaction with human interaction with people. So at certain times, it almost became a kind of catechetical group because many of the people were not even Orthodox yet. So yeah, there's some overlap in those groups. But again, come COVID, then we switched that on to Zoom straight away, and it seems to work. We actually managed to get more people because of the logistical difficulties for people in a city the size of London to get themselves on a weekday evening to the cathedral is quite considerable. So, so we carry on with that. We did. We read our way, starting last autumn, somewhere through the book of Genesis, which is really interesting. And now we're on to Exodus. We'll see where we'll go with that.
Maybe some of the participants wants to ask Father Joseph about something.
Father Joseph, what was the main thing that attracted your attention, your spiritual attention towards Orthodoxy? What was the main reason why did you become Orthodox?
I think initially it was definitely this observing how the Orthodox people pray in the church. You have the background is this. As I said, I was brought up Roman Catholic. I'm actually just old enough to remember the old Roman Catholic Church before Vatican II, when the Mass was still in Latin, when the priest still stood mostly facing east, when there was still a sense of, not just say reverence, I would say, in the services. With the Vatican II, this changed very substantially and very quickly. All of us, almost overnight, the Mass is in English, in a rather unsatisfactory translation. The altar is moved away from the east wall. The priest is around the other side. He's facing you. The motivation for that was a slogan called the feeling that the laity, the lay people, need to be more, quote, involved in the liturgy. It was thought that but there was an element, the Mass was something that the Father says up there, does up there, and your job as a layperson is simply to kneel in the pew, say your rosary, and just hear Mass, and that's it. Well, all right, there's an element of truth in that, but definitely the people in the old Roman Catholic Church, they were praying, they were taking it seriously. With this really Reformation, I think the Reformation is not too strong a word to use for Vatican II. all of a sudden, the focus is on us. Yeah, hey guys, we're celebrating the mass together. The priest is facing the people. It's like literally sort of introspective. Plus, there are some liturgical novelties or abuses. Okay, no, we don't need the organ. No, we don't need the Gregorian chant. We've got some guitars. Let's have some happy songs. Maybe some balloons. Why not? And something really, really important and precious has been lost. And I think I picked, when I came into the Orthodox Church, all of a sudden you have a liturgy which is serious. You have something which is beautiful, something which reaches your soul. And I could see straight away from the first minute that the people, although they are not doing the responses, that's what the choir is doing. They haven't got service booklets, they haven't got missals. But they are praying, they are caught up in this divine mystery of heaven on earth. And it's palpable. That was the first thing. The second thing was a bit more intellectual, theological questions. When it seemed, it became increasingly clear to me that that in the theological divergence that took place, basically the Orthodox Church was following the teaching and practice of the early Church, and that the Roman Catholic Church had introduced certain novelties, theologically. But at the end of the day, you recognize where the truth seems to be, and where your heart, the Holy Spirit, is leading you. It's a bit like getting married. It's just a case that you just recognize that this is it. There's no other possibility. You have to go through it. Does that answer the question, Mehan?
Absolutely. I just want to add one more question. You mentioned the Reformation that impacted Catholic Church and brought lots of changes, and through these changes, Catholic Church lost its primary faith. But we nowadays very often hear within Orthodox Church that Orthodox Church needs renewal, needs reformation. And because time is changing, why shouldn't Orthodox Church not change? Why should Orthodox Church remain still antique and not take on the spirit of the time that we are going through?
I think we have to distinguish here. Before I answer that question, let me just share with you a revealing experience I had years ago in the cathedral in London. Two Roman Catholic priests walked into the cathedral. They were obviously priests, they were dressed, they were wearing the cassock, they were wearing the biretta. They stood quietly at the back for a couple of minutes. And then I was a deacon, so I kind of just approached them gently, to be friendly, to to say hello to both. And one of them said, "Ah, so you have kept what we have lost." So they recognized something. It wasn't even a service going, it was just the church. Anyway, the question of modernism or modernization. What do we mean when we say that the Orthodox Church is unchanging? We mean that the faith is the same faith that we believe and teach today, is the same, essentially the same as the faith of the apostles. That's what I mean if we say the church is apostolic. In the Orthodox Church, we have not added anything, and we have not taken anything away, because it's impossible. The faith is delivered once and for all to the same. We have the same sacraments. Everything is essentially the same. On the other hand, we do not believe, that the apostles celebrated the divine liturgy, wearing the sarkos and the mitre, and with all this Byzantine court ceremonial. Those attributes, those more external things, the church has acquired in the course of history, and in different parts of the church, but differently. So there is, on that level, there is both a diversity and a development. But the diversity was always there. The liturgy in the 2nd century was, first it was not necessarily the same in Rome as it was in Antioch or Alexandria. Still less, up here in the northern islands. But that is all legitimate diversity, and the changes that happened were absolutely normal, understandable for the time. Now you could say that, well, why we stop there? Why are we still celebrating the liturgy as if we were still in the Byzantine Empire? I said somebody was interested in Byzantine history and culture, and I said, you want to see Byzantium, come to the Russian Orthodox Church. It's all there. But I think the fact that we are not in a hurry to change things is a good point. You have to be very careful without, otherwise you end up with unintended consequences. And I think the example that I referred to with the Roman Catholic Church, it should be a warning to all of us not to tinker with things like that. But there are organic changes that are perfectly acceptable. For instance, take something like the icon scheme, the iconostas. This is a perfect example of historical development. From the earliest centuries, where it was just a very low rail on which a couple of icons might be set, to the ceiling, floor to ceiling iconostasis, which appear as late, what is the 16th century in Russia, for example. There is no need to recreate that or to stay with that in a situation where it's neither possible nor even appropriate. So in many new Orthodox churches today, we see a kind of reversion to the earlier forms. The early in the cathedral, we did a big refurbishment a few years ago, and finally installed a permanent iconostasis, but it's not floor to ceiling. It's only one story. It's in an early Byzantine form that matches the building. So I think we have to be careful but reasonable about such questions. Another question, if you're talking about the moral and ethical issues, I'm not sure if that's what you're thinking of. Well, again, we can't make arbitrary changes here. Moral teaching has dogmatic and theological foundations. Interesting question, though, about what to do with the ethical questions which never arose before. So the whole sphere of bioethics. This is something that demands actually serious theological consideration. And that process is ongoing.
Thank you, Father. I think that really answers the question that we need to be careful what we consider to be the so-called Reformation, like whether we're talking about some dogmatical aspects, the foundation of church teaching, or are we talking about some forms, which is the rites, or as you're saying, things like involvement of iconostasis, etc. Because obviously in some of the places abroad, we don't necessarily have our own parishes, and sometimes we're just being allowed into certain buildings which obviously don't correspond to traditional, structure of Orthodox Church, and then obviously we lack a lot of those elements that would be considered to be traditionally Orthodox, and thus we have to serve in the conditions that don't necessarily match. So yeah, it's quite important to stay reasonable, as you've mentioned, and to keep that in mind. Father Michael, do you want to add anything, or maybe other participants also want to add anything?
I was just curious. You mentioned there was. I'm not too up to date on the kind of politics within Orthodoxy. What was the kind of? You said there was a bit of tension within the Orthodox Church at the moment. There was some. Could you maybe tell me a bit more about that?
Well, it's fun. I think it's fundamentally a problem of what we call ecclesiology. That is the belief and the practice concerning the nature of the church. Not its sort of deepest theological foundation as the body of Christ, but practically how the church is organized here on earth. Perhaps you're aware that one of the main reasons why there was this great and tragic schism in the 11th century between the West and the East, between what was becoming the Roman Catholic Church and what came to be known as the Orthodox Church, was exactly this question. That the teaching arose quite gradually but systematically that the church has a hierarchical structure, and at the top is the Bishop of Rome, the Pope of Rome, and that everyone has to submit to the Pope of Rome. Now that was demonstrably an innovation, a teaching that developed over the course of some centuries, and so it led to the split, because the other ancient churches, Constantinople, Jerusalem, Alexandria, Antioch, did not recognize, did not accept this claim. The traditional mode of governance of the church is what we call concilia. That important problems have to be decided together, usually in the form of a council of bishops from all the local Orthodox churches. The church is one, but it exists concretely in specific places, and those in local churches have the responsibility and the right to manage their own life internally. What we have witnessed over the past 100 years or so, of course, let me say, within those ancient churches, there is an order of precedence for historical reasons. The Church of Rome used to have the precedent because it was the capital of the Roman Empire. And when Constantine moved the capital to the east of Constantinople, the Church of Constantinople obtained a primacy second to Rome, and when Rome left, as we would say, then it had first place in this system of primacy, but this is a primacy of respect, of honor, not of jurisdiction. What we have seen in the last 100 years is that the Patriarchate of Constantinople has begun to make claims very similar to those of the ancient Church of Rome, in terms of claiming a primacy of jurisdiction. And this it began about 2021, so, and has continued steadily. And this has led to real tensions within the Orthodox family of churches, unfortunately. And we're in, it's still very much an open question. We have some very very messy situations as a result of that in Ukraine and otherwise, but it's a theater. It's basically a development in the ecclesiology, which is, to put it mildly, controversial. I think that's probably as much as we need to say.
Yeah,
we
thanks.
need to pray for the at every liturgy we pray for the holy churches of God and for the unity of all, and that's something really important.
Thank you.
Thank you, Father. I think it's too late already, so we have to finish. And I'd like to thank you again to join us tonight. I think it's very interesting for all of us, and we wish you, Father, all the best for missionary work which you're doing.
Well, you know, it is the gospel is coming alive, particularly the place where Christ says to the disciples, "Look, you know, the harvest is great, yeah, but the laborers are not so many." So we have to pray,
Yeah, indeed.
for more, the Lord to send more laborers into the harvest.
So hopefully that people, that upcoming generation that you mentioned, you know, younger people coming in, will actually continue the work further on.
I have no doubt that that's the case. Yes, but we need to think carefully about how to facilitate that, how to support such people in building up the church. That's a whole other question. Tell me, what's happened to Father Nikolai? What's he doing out in the Caribbean?
Oh yes, he's in the Caribbean now.
Apostle of Caribbean.
Pirates of Caribbean. Yeah.
But perhaps we'll be able to ask Father Nikolai to actually join in sometime and tell that side of the story.
Oh yes, why not? Why not? Yeah.
That would be a great idea.
Yeah, how many pirates he converted already?
Baptized. Yeah.
Okay,
Caught yet the big treasure within the sea, or he's still hunting on it.
Yeah. Well, I think the main treasure he already found in the Orthodoxy. But we'll let him tell that story. Yes, I would just want to add to Father Michael's basically thanks, Father Joseph. It was a pleasure to have you, and thank you very much for your story, and obviously a lot of interesting moments and thoughts and observations that you mentioned. And yeah, we just hope that continuing further, that we'll be able to stay in touch, you know, within our diocese, and basically attend these virtual meetings and share some information and ideas and suggestions.
I think this is very valuable, and we could do it on different levels. But every contact, every exchange of news and events is valuable.
And Father, say hello. Yeah. Say hello to Matushka Sarah.
Absolutely, send her our hellos.
Because Matushka Sarah, she's a choir director in the cathedral, so she's this part of the choir.
She's not the choir director, but she's an assistant. She is the ostavnica, the one who works out what the choir director needs to direct. So neither of us have been at the cathedral this really the whole year, but we travel almost every weekend to one or another of the parishes. We do just the choir there, of course. It's good teamwork.
Okay, Father. Thank you very much. And
thank you very much, Father. Thank you very much, Father.
Nice to meet you. God bless you.
God bless you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Bye, everybody.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you.